Chapter 13. The labor market in the macroeconomy. The labor market, basic concepts. Because the economy is dynamic, frictional, and structural, unemployment are inevitable and in some ways desirable. Times of cyclical unemployment are of concern to macroeconomic policy makers. In general, employment tends to fall when aggregate output falls and rise when aggregate output rises. The classical view of the labor market. Classical economists believe that the interaction of supply and demand in the labor market brings about equilibrium and that unemployment, beyond the frictional and structural amounts, does not exist. The classical view of the labor market is consistent with the theory of a vertical aggregate supply curve. Some economists argue that the unemployment rate is not an accurate indicator of whether the labor market is working properly. Unemployed people who are considered part of the labor force may be offered jobs but may be unwilling to take those jobs at the offered salaries. Some of the unemployed may have chosen not to work, but this result does not mean that the labor market has malfunctioned. Explaining the existence of unemployment. Efficiency wage theory holds that the productivity of workers increases with the wage rate. If this is true, firms may have an incentive to pay wages above the wage at which the quantity of labor supplied is equal to the quantity of labor demanded. At all wages above the equilibrium, there will be an excess supply of labor and therefore unemployment. If firms are operating with incomplete or imperfect information, they may not know what the market clearing wage is. As a result, they may set their wages incorrectly and bring about unemployment. Because the economy is so complex, it may take considerable time for firms to correct these mistakes. Minimum wage laws, which set a floor for wage rates, are one factor contributing to unemployment of teenagers and very low-skilled workers. If the market clearing wage for some groups of workers is below the minimum wage, some members of this group will be unemployed. Explaining the existence of cyclical unemployment. If wages are sticky downward, cyclical unemployment may result. Downwardly sticky wages may be brought about by social, implicit, or explicit contracts not to cut wages. If the equilibrium wage rate falls but wages are prevented from falling also, the result will be unemployment. The short-run relationship between the unemployment rate and inflation. There is a negative relationship between the unemployment rate, U, and aggregate output, income, Y. When Y rises, U falls. When Y falls, U rises. The relationship between the unemployment rate and the price level is negative. As the unemployment rate declines and the economy moves closer to capacity, the price level rises more and more. The Phillips curve represents the relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. During the 1950s and 1960s, this relationship was stable and there seemed to be a predictable trade-off between inflation and unemployment. As a result of import price increases, which led to shifts in aggregate supply, the relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate was erratic in the 1970s. Inflation depends on more than just the unemployment rate. The long-run aggregate supply curve, potential output, and the natural rate of unemployment. Those who believe that the S-curve is vertical in the long run also believe that the Phillips curve is vertical in the long run at the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate is generally the sum of the frictional and structural rates. If the Phillips curve is vertical in the long run, then there is a limit to how low government policy can push the unemployment rate without setting off inflation. The narrow theory says that the price level will accelerate when the unemployment rate is below the narrow and decelerate when the unemployment rate is above the narrow